No country can lead the fight for social justice unless its commitment to its own people is credible and determined, unless it seeks jobs and not the dole for men, unless it feels anguish as long as any of its children are hungry, unless it believes in opportunity for all of its citizens all across this land.
Brother Ted Kennedy, as he influences national policies and politics. But as he has declined any efforts that would lead him to the White House in '88, many have begun to look at the next wave of Kennedys, the new generation. One of the most promising family members is Joseph Kennedy II, son of the late Robert Kennedy. He recently announced his candidacy for the hotly contested congressional seat, soon to be vacated by House Speaker Thomas P. Tip O'Neill Jr.
Announcing a campaign to be your Democratic nominee.
So the family business is alive and well.
The elementary school.
Yes, there is another Kennedy seeking political office in America.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
This time it's Joseph Kennedy III, fighting for a congressional seat in Massachusetts, and his name alone is making him an immediate front-runner.
They taught me that public service is an honor, given in trust, and that trust must be earned each and every day.
Saludos y bienvenidos a Pesos y Contrapesos. Aquí en esta edición especial nos encontramos en Washington DC. Aquí conmigo Paola González, Ricardo Cintrón y Camilo Miguel Bosque. And now we have a 7-year congressman, Bobby Kennedy's great grandson, right?
Grandson.
I put it to.
There's a lot of us.
Okay.
Está bien.
The 7-year congressman, Joe Kennedy III. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Joe, I wanted to read you something about a family. I know a family who experienced discrimination in their home country, poverty, and a government that turned the other way. They were forced to flee their homeland, travel over land and water, ended up in the shores of our country. They faced discrimination, and they faced prejudice. They built a community. They held tightly to each other, and slowly but surely, they built the future that they imagined they could in a country that promised them so. Does that sound familiar?
It does.
What family is that?
That's mine, and a lot of others. And
Yeah.
I think that's the point that I hope many American families recognize, is that a lot of the challenges that we are seeing around the country, particularly these political discussions and disagreements around immigration, are lessons that many of our families learned in the past through some very harsh treatment from folks that were already here, as people came here seeking a better life, escaping violence, persecution, disaster, and all that those families back then were asking for was a chance that their children and their families might have a better future. And it's all that I think other families today are asking as they approach the United States. And I think if there's a central promise that our country makes to our people and the rest of the world, it's that is a promise that we strive to make good on here.
And that's exactly what I was thinking when I read that. I was thinking Puerto Ricans are not actually immigrants.
No.
But they have faced the same discriminations as immigrants, and as the Irish did when the No Irish Needed. There were also signs like No Puerto Ricans Wanted or Needed. And with all that in context, I want also to ask you, I have researched in Massachusetts. It's one of the third favorite places to Puerto Ricans to go now. It's New York and Florida, and then Massachusetts. It's like 300,000 plus Puerto Ricans, and on your district, there are like 14,000 Puerto Ricans. Why do you think it's the Puerto Ricans want to go to Massachusetts? Why they feel so secure to go to Massachusetts? Or
I guess it's probably not the weather. I think Massachusetts is a community that has strong immigrant roots, and again, understanding that Puerto Ricans are American citizens, but an immigrant community, immigrant culture is something that is very common across greater Boston and communities like Lowell and Lawrence, Springfield, Pittsfield, Fall River, Taunton, where you have pockets of communities, now diaspora, from communities around the world, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Azores, Portugal, Central America, plenty of countries.
They found a home in Massachusetts.
They found a home, but you also then have a understanding that there is some level of then greater community and some level of the appreciation for what an immigrant community and tightly knit communities contribute back to the fabric of a whole. And Massachusetts, like every place around our country, has its own struggles and has its own challenges, but that immigrant story, I think, is very much tightly woven into our history and also our future. The last piece that I think is so critical about this are the driving aspects of our economy are around talent. And when you look at the educational institutions that Massachusetts is famous for, some of the best educational institutions anywhere in the world, that they try to find talent anywhere they can and bring it in.
Okay.
But that means that there's an acknowledgement that talent does not discriminate based on nationality, based on skin tone, based off of your place of birth. Talent is everywhere.
Yeah.
And that if you want the best and brightest to come to your community, to contribute back to your community, you got to be willing to reach out, find them, bring them in, and accept them.
Yeah, accept them.
Yeah, Congressman, following up on that issue, it's no surprise that after Hurricane Irma and Maria, there was a massive exodus of Puerto Ricans to all parts of the United States, particularly in Massachusetts. And that presents challenges to Massachusetts, but it also presents massive challenges to Puerto Rico because we're losing most of the talent, we're losing most of the families that are not raising their children in Puerto Rico, they're not spending in Puerto Rico, and most of the funds that have been allocated to Puerto Rico, there's been a big discussion. The fact that the Trump administration has said that Puerto Ricans, that the current administration in Puerto Rico is not using the funds adequately. The fact that it's way too much money, and that Texas didn't receive that much money, and Florida. We know that's mostly fake news because it's not based on facts. It's the same federal agency, the Office of Management and Budget, has said that it's allocated $41 billion, but we've only received $11 billion. My question to you is, what measures can Congress do? Can Congress take to guarantee that those funds are not susceptible to these political discussions?
So, one, there's a lot we can do, there's a lot we should do. But I think there's also some bigger, broader issues that you started to allude to that even if you address the issue of the disbursement of those funds, that does not solve the structural inequity of the treatment of Puerto Rico and its people by the United States government that goes back decades. And so, yes, the first order is to try to make sure that emergency funding off of sequential natural disasters, but built on top of a debt crisis that makes it harder for a country to respond because of a debt crisis, largely based upon incentives placed in part by, or put in place by, an American government.
Yeah.
That you have to make sure that that money is there to respond to the immediate need. But if you do that without addressing the underlying structural factors, you're not going to do right by the people of Puerto Rico. You're also not going to do right by everyone else in this country or our government, because you want to make sure that everybody wants Puerto Rico to succeed.
Yes.
And unless you address those underlying structural factors, you're setting up a Puerto Rican government to continue to struggle to try to make good on its debt obligations, on its ability to attract and retain talent, to create investment back home to employ those families, unless people are treated fairly and equally. And look, the fundamental promise that this country makes, getting back to the first question you all asked, was not just about opportunity, but in order to have that opportunity, it means that people are going to be treated fairly, so that folks can make the most out of their own talent, their determination, their drive, their work ethic. The fact is that every single person from Puerto Rico is an American citizen. Every single one of them. The fact also is that the moment they leave Puerto Rico and arrive in Florida, New York, Massachusetts, they enjoy greater rights, privileges, than they do if they stay home. And as long as that is the case, Puerto Rico is going to remain at a structural disadvantage from the rest of the continental United States.
So in terms of the structure and how we are treated, how would you say and how could it change the discrimination that we receive in terms of funds and how they're assigned to us? Because we know that we receive 55% and we can...
in the Medicaid and Medicare.
Medicaid,
Yeah.
So, a couple of things. First, and trying to get back to the answer I didn't fully give to you on your last question. First is to make sure that you get that the funds needed for adequate emergency recovery are allocated and dispersed. That Congress, through our oversight abilities, continues to put pressure on and puts more pressure on those federal agencies to disperse that funding, to ensure that funding, to oversee that funding, make sure it's used properly, but to make sure that it is going where it should go, where it needs to go, and to help the people of Puerto Rico. And I expect that you will see more of that with a Democratic House, particularly pushing on our federal agencies to try to make sure that money gets dispersed. And there's a bunch of different measures we can do, from oversight hearings to letters to press conferences to visits, et cetera. And I think I would expect more. Two, it is, I think, then turning to your question, Paula, about the overall structural change, and I come back to three major ones, and I'm sure there are more. But one are structural inequities in the tax code. If you look back at the history between the United States government and Puerto Rico, and an economy that a long time ago was based off of agriculture, and that was shifted, and then was changed to be based off of essentially pharmaceutical manufacturing because of incentives in the U.S. tax code. And then those incentives went away, and of course if the incentives go away, companies that base that investment off those incentives are then going to move. And they did, and the U.S. government didn't do anything else to address it.
Yeah.
And so one is making sure that those underlying tax incentives are addressed in a comprehensive and meaningful way so that we understand what the short-term and long-term consequences are, and we make a commitment to Puerto Rico and to the United States that we're going to be treated, everybody's going to be treated fairly and equally and in a way that's going to incentivize that investment. Two, for issues around basic entitlements and safety net, like Medicaid. You pointed to a 55% FMAP, the federal matching program.
Yeah.
I've seen analysis that say that if you were treated the way, if Puerto Rico was treated the way that every other state would be treated, that match would be over 80%.
Yeah, that's some of the poor states reach like 80.
Yeah. And so it's technically called the FMAP, right? It's the federal matching funds for Medicaid, which is a joint federal state program. That is an enormous gap that then comes back on the backs of either individuals because you don't get the money, or the government to try to make up that difference. And when it comes to basic access to healthcare, people in this country, every American citizen should be entitled to that equal treatment. And what makes that even harder to understand is the moment you get on an airplane, the moment you get off in Fort Lauderdale, the moment you get off in Miami, you're treated differently.
Yeah.
Three, earned income tax credit. One of the most successful anti-poverty measures that we have in the U.S. tax code does not apply to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico just instituted their own locally, which a number of other states, municipalities have across the United States, but that only supplements the federal incentive. Critics will point to the fact that Puerto Ricans, on island, don't pay those federal income taxes.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is up for discussion, but if you look at the successful anti-poverty measures that we have as the federal government to try to pull people out of poverty, and you understand that those are in limited supply or short shift or cut back for American citizens living in a U.S. territory, I think you start to understand that there are structural inequities that then lead to, if you have a foundation of an economy and society based off of that inequity, if you have something like 2 unprecedented natural disasters,
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot of additional resilience put in place to be able to recover, particularly when you then run into these roadblocks that are put up by an administration that, for whatever reason, will not or finds every way not to actually try to solve the problem.
Congressman, I think you mentioned the uncertainty that the funds were gonna be used or are gonna be put to use the way the people wanted. And that was one of the questions that I asked other congressmen, or especially our Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez, is that here in Congress, do your fellow congressmen or congresswomen really trust the administration? Because the numbers that Donald Trump presented and then the governor presented, they are clearly not the same. But in terms of the other thing that Donald Trump said, that they don't trust the Puerto Rican government, is that something that Congress as a whole feels the same way?
No, Congress on a whole does not feel the same way. Okay. I don't want to speak for other colleagues of mine, but I think writ large, the reality that I find in Congress now, in the House of Representatives anyway, with the Democratic majority, part of this falls down pretty much on party lines. Many Democratic representatives and the communities that we represent do not trust much of what this president says, or certainly the actions or motives of an administration. He has trouble staying on. The president has trouble staying on a consistent message, and oftentimes, as you alluded to earlier, the underlying facts that the president talks about or points to are not wholly accurate or are false. And for folks that follow various issues there and understand that, there leads to this extraordinary distrust of the president, not only what he says, or sometimes the motives behind what he does. There are colleagues of mine, however, who represent communities that believe in the president 100%, and that the president enjoys enormous support. And those individuals have tremendous confidence in him, in his administration, in his ideas, motives, and implementation, and feel like if he has been unsuccessful at delivering on various campaign promises, it is because
The
Democrats, or in the past, even establishment Republicans.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you see that tension, and you see that road. I think the only way that I know how to confront that is speak clearly, speak to the American public as best we possibly can, to the constituents that are affected, so that and be accurate. And so where the administration has a point where they would point to various obstacles or issues, fine, they might have a point. Look, we have to acknowledge the fact that one of the additional challenges that affected Puerto Rico after massive hurricanes is that it's an island. Mm-hmm. That is several days visit by boat from the mainland United States. And so you can't, when we saw Hurricane Harvey in Texas, you saw people from across southern United States grab boats and cars and literally go try to help. Mm-hmm. It's harder for people to do that in Puerto Rico, right? And to get aid and additional supplies and support in. Fine. We also have the most powerful military anywhere in the world that is pretty good at trying to make stuff like this work. It's literally what they do. And so, while I think some would say we can understand and appreciate the different additional levels of complexity or different additional challenge, that doesn't hold a year later. Mm-hmm. That might hold 3 or 4 days later. It might hold even a month later. That doesn't hold water a year later. It doesn't explain why months after the fact you're still with a community. United States citizens are struggling getting access to electricity and clean water and healthcare. It's unexcusable.
Congressman, recently your college, Darmsoro, present a bill, the bill H.R. 1965, that propose admits Puerto Rico like a state of the United States, the 51st state. What do you think about the bill? Do you support the bill?
So, when it comes to Puerto Rican statehood, that is ultimately, it's a question for the people in Puerto Rico. I've seen, obviously, the results of recent polls that have indicated that statehood is becoming far more popular than I think it was in the past. There's critics that point to various aspects about those polls, that's a question for Puerto Rico. I will say, I have a hard time believing that Puerto Rico would be treated the way it has been treated with these structural inequities that we have discussed if Puerto Rico was an official state with 2 voting U.S. senators and
maybe 6,
probably
like,
six members of the House of Representatives. I think that is not meant to be any sort of indictment or disparagement over your current representative. I think she does a great job. It's just, that's one, you don't have representation in the Senate, and you don't have 5 or 6 additional individuals of whatever party they might be.
Don't have the leverage then to do that.
You don't have the leverage to come together and to amplify that voice. You put that on the back of one person who does not have the full privileges of voting.
Yeah.
And so that is, though, ultimate understanding, trying to be respectful of the history of Puerto Rico, the pride of the Puerto Rican people, the impact that decision will have. That is not for me to say. That is a question for the people of Puerto Rico to understand what those potential benefits and drawbacks of statehood might be. But I think my own belief is that I think if you're going to try to address the structural inequities, I think doing it with the status quo is awfully hard to do.
We just would ask you if those 3 are possible, the statehood if there's a majority, or the Commonwealth enhanced if there's a possibility in the Constitution of the United States. Many people argue it cannot happen. Or if independence is going to be a good transition for independence.
Yeah. Again, I think there's a lot of details in those 3 that need to be worked out.
Yeah.
And I think those details are important because the impacts for the people of Puerto Rico are large.
Yeah.
And when you talk about a transition, what the obligations and responsibilities of the U.S. federal government would be during that transition are obviously important as well. Ultimately, I think this comes down to again, given the history and experience and community and culture and pride of Puerto Rican people, recognizing that your home is your home, and that you enjoy and deserve full rights and responsibilities and obligations of U.S. citizenship, and you have them. But that moment, because of that territorial status, the federal government points to that as reasons to undercut some of the other privileges that come with outright citizenship. And so I think it is going to be difficult to try to fully absorb all of those or fully obtain all of the other privileges that U.S. other states have without being a full-on state. But I also recognize that has significant cultural, historical implications for Puerto Rico. And so that's a choice for the people of Puerto Rico to make. But it's a choice that does not come without cost. To be clear, though, just because Puerto Rico is a territory does not absolve the United States government of responsibility to United States citizens. And there is no excuse and there's no justification for the way in which Puerto Rico has been treated in the past several years, certainly longer with regards to our tax code and the debt crisis. But without question, with regards to the way that the U.S. government has responded to the immediate needs of its U.S. citizenry after consecutive natural disasters, it's been shameful. And this president bears an awful lot of responsibility for that. This administration should be doing more to try to make sure that every person gets access to the care that they need, and to get Puerto Rico up and running as quickly as we possibly can. You pointed to the talent and the community, the families that have been leaving the island. It's going to be awfully hard to rebuild a functional economy when young people are leaving, professionals are leaving, and the majority of the employable population is fleeing. And you can attract them back, but there's going to have to be an effort to do so.
very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the worry and the preoccupation and the inquiry is because we have had referendums in the past, and there is talk about having one soon with Governor Rosselló, and yesterday we had an interview with Jennifer Gonzalez, and it's in plan. So if it comes out as it has in the past, that people vote in favor of statehood, the thing is, and we wonder what will be the action then. What will Congress do? Because the Puerto Rican people have spoken in the past, and this administration wants to make it clear again. But
so I think a couple of things. One, we'll see what the results of that election are. I don't want to speculate. Two, I think it is important when it comes to something as monumental as this, the stronger the mandate, the more clear and more powerful message. And the longer the time that takes place. Look, we've seen a number of results internationally that have been very thin, that there's questions as to whether if Brexit was voted on again now, would that succeed? Plenty of questions about other political leaders around the world, that if there were other elections now, would they win or would they lose? And part of having tough questions in divided nations is that lots of those are close, but when it comes to something as monumental as statehood, where if you're coming in, probably not leaving, so trying to make sure that is the statehood camp is going to have a stronger argument to make with a larger margin, and one that you can point to over a series of now years where those polls have indicated that. And
it's important for you guys the participation in those elections.
Yes, yes.
So one can argue that the 2017 participation
is very right, and so I think when you start going down that pathway, you want to make sure that is you're not going to get 100% participation, you're not going to get 100% that's going to vote one way, but you want to make sure for something that is going to impact the future of every single individual in that community, that the community writ large has spoken. And so I think one that's important too, look, we then have to address there will have to be a plan put in place about what that means and over what timeline and how that works, and recognizing that there will be political opposition, particularly from this administration, to try to get anybody in. But we have done that in the past, and I think focusing on, forget the politics of it, focusing on the people and the inequities that persist there, and the fact that, again, contrary to what I think many Americans understand and believe, those are U.S. citizens. Yeah. And that's what this comes to.
Congressman, are you going to run for Senate?
We've got two good senators there right now, my friend. We'll get a third one. So.
But not yet. Well, esto fue todo por hoy con el congresista Joe Kennedy. Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you
for having us.